So let us set up, and today let's discuss the directive principles of state policy, and we are here to discuss the polity portions. So let's get started. Okay. So yeah. So today I am going to discuss the important point. Let me just check if it's working. Yeah, it's perfectly fine. So yesterday, sorry for that, like there was no internet, so there was a lot of issues. But DPSP is the most important point, and we have already covered the classification and the important introduction and everything related to DPSP has been covered already. Now today I will cover the difference between fundamental rights and DPSP first of all. So what is the difference between fundamental rights and DPSP? So fundamental rights are something which is negative in character. For example, they are like state should not do this, state should not promote untouchability, state should abolish titles, state should not discriminate. Okay, so these are like relatively negative in character, while DPSP are positive in character. State should provide job opportunities, state should provide work opportunities, state should provide maternity relief, state should provide welfare for the workers, state should provide early childhood care less than 6 years. So they are usually positive, they are usually negative in character. Obviously goes without saying fundamental rights are legally enforceable in a court of law, while directive principles of state policies are not legally enforceable in court of law. So these two things are absolutely clear, there is no doubt about it. Now the third important thing which we talk about is you do not need explicit laws for fundamental rights to for them to come into force. For example, right against abolition of titles, or so for that there should not be any separate law. They can make a law, but there is no law. But for DPSP, every time a DPSP has to come into force, आपको एक law बनाना बहुत जरूरी है, ठीक है? So this is very very important. Then fundamental rights are usually individual specific. They talk about individual in general, okay? While the DPSP talks about at a collective level, at the community level. So these things are also pretty clear, and they are usually political in nature, and these are socio-economic in nature. So these are the major difference between the fundamental rights and the directive principles of state policy. So they will establish political democracy, they will establish social and economic democracy. Now I will take you through the entire evolution of fundamental rights and directive principles of state policy. So this is important because when the constitution was established, so just 1 year hence, the case in Supreme Court said that fundamental rights are much superior to directive principles of state policy. So that was the standing. But today the final standing is that both of them have to be harmoniously interpreted, the doctrine of harmonious construction. Plus they will need to be important in the sense that you will have to, in this case, now the 39B and C take precedence over article 14 and 19 sometimes. So slightly directive principles can be given effect, so that point is also pretty much clear. So directive principles plus fundamental rights, they form the soul of the constitution, they form the philosophy of the constitution, they form the cornerstone of the constitution, they form the conscience of the constitution according to Granville Austin. Now what is the purpose? Purpose is basically to bring non-violent social reform, social revolution, and article 37 already says that the DPSP has to be incorporated in the laws made by the union, okay, so that they are responsible to the electorate and they make the right laws. So it is very much important for that. And finally, this is very important. So we start with the 1951 case of State of Madras versus Champakam Dorai Rajan case. So here what they said was that directive principles of state policy are inferior to fundamental rights. Very plain, very simple. So though the state will try to give preference to both, but in case there is a clash, there will be no harmonious construction, but fundamental rights will be given preference over directive principles of state policy. So it means that directive principles of state policy shall conform and they will run subsidiary to fundamental rights. They will be below for fundamental rights. And if there is any conflict, fundamental right will always prevail over directive principles of state policy. So it is based on a very narrow interpretation. Because of this, many social legislation like land reform acts were declared null and void and were declared unconstitutional. Why? Because at that time Article 31 was also there, which was Right to Property Act, and 19(1)(f), which was Right to Property Act. So right to property was a fundamental right. No longer in India it is a fundamental right. It is there in outside world but not in India. So then you come in 1957. 1957 is Re-Kerala Education Bill, which talks about the doctrine of very important doctrine of harmonious construction. So the earlier one was very narrow interpretation, and now it is very wider interpretation. So what does it say? That they will try to reconcile fundamental rights and directive principles of state policy as far as possible, and there is no inherent conflict between fundamental rights and directive principles, and basically they are an integrated scheme where they are establishing political, social and economic order. So this is helping in the political order, this is helping in social and economic order. So these three inherently are being contributed directly by fundamental rights and directive principles, and they are supplementary to each other, and they are harmoniously constructed and should be harmoniously interpreted. So they says that when like the similar theory was also propagated in the 1976 case of Mumbai Kamgar Sabha. So what is trying to say is that, let's say there is a law which is trying to differentiate between fundamental rights and DPSP. मतलब there is a rift between the two. या तो fundamental rights सही है, DPSP सही है. उस केस में the court will interpret in a wider way that both of these laws tend to get effect. For example, it is a fundamental right to eat whatever you want, drink whatever you want. DPSP says that we should be against alcohol intoxication. So both of these are fundamentally opposite to each other, right? Like it's your right to get like drink whatever you want. But what the law will say that within 100 meter of highways or within 100 meters of schools there will be no liquor shop. So here there is a compromise on both of the ends. So it is a wider interpretation. This is a and what they are saying is, like in the construction of these law, if both of them can be interpreted in two ways. One way is they are contradictory to each other, and one way both of them can be simultaneously taken into consideration, and the latter will be preferred. Okay, so it is always remember this is called as if a law passed by a state giving effect to one or more DPSP, and the first one is like DPSP is being in harmony with FR fundamental rights, and second one fundamental rights are in conflict with directive principles, then here the first one will be preferred. This is called as theory of harmonization. I hope that part is absolutely clear. Now it is important that this is the mandate of the constitution, not only to executive and legislature but also to the judiciary. So all these three are bound. So you should give effect to the fundamental right, directive principles of state policy, and this is the third point which is key point, and the overall level there should be harmonious construction in order to achieve political, social and economic order. So इसमें क्या हुआ? Because they are saying that if there are certain laws which are capable of only one type of interpretation. For example, you have a private bank, and if I nationalize it, then you will lose your right to property. There are no two ways about it. So in that case, fundamental rights will be preferred over directive principles. So that is why Bank Nationalization Act and the Privy Purchase Abolition Act. Privy Purchase क्या होता था? जो princely states होते थे उनको एक सम जाता था, because they have been integrated into India. तो ये जो दो एक्ट थे इनको null and void डिक्लेयर कर दिया गया. तो अभी तक fundamental rights are superior to directive principles. Now comes Golaknath case of 1967. Supreme Court says Parliament cannot amend any fundamental right, they cannot take away any fundamental right because it is unconstitutional. तो बहुत ही सिंपली उन्होंने बोल दिया fundamental rights are sacrosanct in nature, they are सर्वे सर्वा, वो सबसे superior है. So fundamental rights cannot be amended for the implementation of directive principles. So it means that fundamental rights are 4 times more bigger than the directive principles of state policies, 5 times bigger, 10 times bigger, much bigger. Now let us talk about, so this was till 1967. Now comes the 24th. So whenever a case comes, it means Supreme Court is trying to strike. Whenever a Constitutional Amendment Act comes, it means Parliament is trying to fight. So it is in 1971, it reversed the Golaknath case. So it said that if we have to make a law to give effect to preamble and DPSP, and if it violates fundamental rights, that is perfectly fine. Parliament has unlimited power to amend any fundamental right. They can abridge or take away any fundamental right. ये बिल्कुल रिवर्स हो गया गोलकनाथ केस का. तो यहाँ पे आप देख रहे हो कि they want to take away all the fundamental rights. So Article 30 is not applicable to any amendment made under Article 368. They are saying that any amendment can be done to fundamental right. Tomorrow we can take all the fundamental rights if need be. And President has to give assent, right? Shall give his assent to Constitutional Amendment Act. So this also is very important. So this they may ask you what can President do if a constitutional amendment bill has been passed by both the houses, that is Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha. President, according to 24th Constitutional Amendment Act of 1971, has to compulsorily give assent to the bill. There is no other option. Now Article 368 includes both the act as well as the procedure, both the process and the procedure. Now comes the second amendment, the 25th Constitutional Amendment Act of 1971. They says that the private property can be acquired for public use, and there cannot be they can't be forced because it is a fundamental right to property. And they introduced Article 31C, that they said that if the state acquires such property, so under Article 39B and C. So 39B and C are the most important directive principles I had covered in the last polity portion video. So just because they are violating the fundamental right, it does not mean that they are unconstitutional only on this ground. So what does it mean? They can take away the property of anyone. So any declaration made by the state cannot be challenged in court of law if it is giving effect to Article 39B and C. So it's pretty simple. Now Ramachandran has described these 24th and 25th Amendment Act as murder of constitution or veritable slaughter of constitution. It was not just changing the constitution, it was completely doing away. And they are saying that it is a smack of totalitarianism. Have you heard the 1984 George Orwell's novel? Something like that. They want to make it socialist state instantly. Totalitarianism means government take control of everything. So thus for the first time DPSP becomes superior to fundamental rights. So under Article 39B and C, they become superior to Article 14, 19 and 31. Now comes 24th April 1973, that is the case Ananda Bharti case versus the state of Kerala. So they said that okay, it is fine, you can amend fundamental rights, no issues with that whatsoever. But you can't take away the power of judicial review. You can't take away certain things which are the basic structure of the Indian Constitution. उनको आप change नहीं कर सकते. So doctrine of basic structure of Constitution says that Parliament can amend the Constitution, but they can't change the fundamental nature. I will talk about what constitutes the basic doctrine. So यहाँ पे वो बोलते हैं कि some principles are inviolable. जैसे इंडिया सेक्युलर कंट्री है, parliamentary form of government है, they are inviolable. Nobody can challenge it. So Parliament has wide powers, okay, but it cannot completely destroy or emasculate the Constitution or take away the power of judicial review from judiciary. ठीक है, just to give effect to directive principles. And they said that you can amend the fundamental rights, but you can't amend the basic structure of the Constitution, and otherwise it will become unconstitutional. It was given by a wafer-thin margin of 7-6 judges. So 13 judge bench was sitting over here. Okay, so you have to remember that. And on the basis of it, the Bank Nationalize Act and Privy Purchase Act were declared to be constitutionally valid. Okay, you can nationalize the banks and you can abolish the Privy Purchase. But it led to for next 44 years roughly. So it has led to fundamental rights becoming basic structure of the Constitution becoming very, very powerful, and judiciary also becoming very, very powerful. It is also said that this case saved the Indian democracy in a way. So obviously it goes without saying, it is a very powerful case. Now let us talk about the basic structure doctrine. What is basic structure doctrine? So this is also very, very important. So according to the case on the Bharti case, then it kept on evolving and evolving. I will just talk about some preamble objectives secularism, rule of law, sovereign democratic republic, unity and integrity of the nation, freedom and dignity of the individual, constitution is supreme, article 32 and 226 of the constitution, Okay, building the welfare state. Balance between part 3 and 4 is again a basic feature of the Indian Constitution. Now, judicial review, independence of the judiciary, principle of equality, effective access to justice, power of the Supreme Court, and like miscellaneous concepts like separation of powers between judiciary, executive, and legislature, federalism, two form of government here. In India, there is a three-tier government. The parliamentary form of government. You can't have presidential form of government in India. Basically, that's what Supreme Court says, because it is part of the basic structure of the Constitution and you can't amend it. Then the principle of free and fair elections. That is also a basic structure of the Indian Constitution. Now, 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act came in 1976, and it said that like DPSP under 39B and C, you can make any law and they can violate Article 14, that is equality, and 19, that is freedom. So both these can be violated and nobody can do anything about it. If only these rights are being violated, the law will be declared absolutely perfectly fine. It is also called as mini constitution because of these changes. So as you can see, DPSP becomes much more powerful than the fundamental rights, like goes without saying. And it is then comes the 44th Constitutional Amendment Act of 1978. They said that right to property is no longer a fundamental right. Do you imagine? Like such a big fight is going on, so they have completely removed right to property as fundamental right, because Supreme Court agreed in 1973 that you can amend the fundamental rights. That is not a basic structure of the Indian Constitution. Now, Minerva Mills case versus Union of India in 1980 said that like disturbance can't be tolerated between DPSP and fundamental rights, and it will be taken on case by case basis. You can't pass a blanket statement कि any law which is giving effect to Article 39B and C will be perfectly fine. अगर उसको effect नहीं दे रहा है, मतलब if it violates 1419, that is fine. ऐसा नहीं चलेगा. So that is in Minerva Mills case. But however, they agreed that the right to property will no longer be a fundamental right. So that is not an issue. Part 3 and Part 4 cannot have an absolute power over each other. Fundamental right cannot dominate DPSP, DPSP cannot dominate fundamental rights. So this was amply made clear by the Supreme Court of India. And goals which are there in DPSP, उनको achieve करना है, बिल्कुल करना है. But you can't violate fundamental rights in the process. And they also said that power of parliament to amend constitution is limited. मतलब parliament cannot amend the constitution in an unlimited way. So this is very important concept which you need to understand. They can't just go on and on to like amend the constitution. It is very limited, and they cannot amend the constitution to make this power unlimited. For example, Narendra Modi is the prime minister of the country abhi. So let's say he makes parliament passes a law that the prime minister's term will now be 100 years. ऐसे नहीं हो सकता. You can't like make your powers infinite. So Supreme Court will strike down that. Okay. Now exceptions can be there, and sometimes to give effect to Article 39B and C, you can violate 14 and 19, but it will be taken on a case by case basis, and they will try to do a theory of harmonious construction where both of them are given equal weightage. Now we have also here to cover directives which are outside the Part 4 of the Indian Constitution. Not all directive principles are there in the Part 4. It extends from Article 36 to 51, and I have covered all of them, so you can see that. So let us see which are the directive principles of state policy which are in the Constitution but outside the Part 4. So 350A is a type of a directive principle which says that instruction has to be given in mother tongue. So for example, you can like they should be taught in Kannada, Telugu, Tamil, basically the language of the child. जो भी उसकी language है उसमें उसको पढ़ाना चाहिए. So that is a directive under Article 350A. Then promotion and development of Hindi language. So Hindi is considered as the official language of India, and so it is under Article 351 that the promotion of Hindi should be there. So there is a separate committee and separate people sitting in the New Delhi to promote the Hindi language. And Article 335 says that claims of scheduled caste and scheduled tribe to services. So these are the directives which are outside the Part 4 of the Indian Constitution. Now, lot of amendments have happened in directive principles. As Supreme Court said that Parliament can amend both the fundamental rights and the directive principles of state policy. That is not an issue at all. So by 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act, what they did was they said that healthy development of children should be there, then free legal aid should be there, then improve the worker participation in management of industries and environment. So they amended 39F, 39A, 43A and 48A. So these were amended by 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act of 1976. Now 44th Amendment Act, which took away the right to property, also introduced one directive principle of state policy. It is important. Article 38 subclause 2 says that minimize the inequality. Then 86th Constitutional Amendment Act of 2002, basically earlier it was 6 to 14 years. By 86th Constitutional Amendment Act, it became a fundamental right as well as a fundamental duty to right to education between 6 to 14 years, and now they changed it to less than 6 years early childhood care. Now 97th Constitutional Amendment Act 2011, it introduced Article 43B. Earlier it was Panchayat and municipalities, and now it became cooperative societies. So these are the major changes in the directive principles of state policies that were made. Now let us talk about the criticism. There is a lot of criticism which goes on of directive principles of state policies. Obviously the first and the foremost thing is they are not legally enforceable. जब कोई legally enforceable ही नहीं है तो लोग उसको lightly ले लेंगे. So basically that is the first and the foremost criticism of fundamental duties, preamble and directive principles of state policies. They are just pious superfluities and aspirations, and it is a check on the bank. मान लो आपको मैं 50,000 रुपए का चेक दे दूं और जब भी उसमें पैसे आएंगे तब आप उसको कैश करा लेना. So you don't know कि when you can cash it, okay? And they are just moral principles and nothing else. They are not practicable, and some are foreign in nature, and they are against the principle of state sovereignty. Some of them, they are illogically arranged, and some of them are scientific in nature, some of them are religious in nature, and some are really important like Article 39B and C, and some are very insignificant. So you have to mention that. Now there is no mention of how to implement them कि भाई 50 साल बाद होंगे, 100 साल बाद होंगे, and they are totally conservative, they are outdated. That is the criticism, that they do not belong in the 21st century. And there is a constitutional conflict between president and prime minister, and so on and so forth, governor and CM, and so on and so forth. But despite all these criticism, obviously they are very important because they act as a guiding principle for the state कि भाई जब भी resources होंगे तो we will be able to make the policies, and they are the directives laid down by the foundation of economic democracy to establish a welfare state. They are also fundamental in the governance of the country and to supplement fundamental rights. And I have already told you अगर कोर्ट को कभी डाउट होगा so they can take the help of directive principles of state policies for interpretation. So they can guide courts for this interpretation. They bring stability and continuity in state policies, and there is a lot of educative value of directive principles as well. There is no legal sanction as such, but there is a political sanction because the electorate will get worried if the directive principles are not implemented, and they will not elect the government next year. For example, if they don't make schemes like MGNREGS, Jandan Yojana, etc. So the electorate will not like it, and they will not elect the government, and they are not enforceable in court of law, but they are very much enforceable in court of people. And they are not given legal enforceability because obviously you need a lot of time and resources to implement them, and they will facilitate the stability and continuity in nation's policies. Okay, they act as a lighthouse, just like a ship can't like properly dock without a lighthouse. So they act as a lighthouse for this, and they are the testing grounds on which the government is judged, and they help in deciding the legal validity. Like one of the most important right is freedom of hunger, and their only implementation possible is through DPSP. So unless DPSP are properly implemented, others people cannot enjoy their fundamental rights fully. And so implementation has been done by Land Reforms Act, banking policy, fixation of minimum wages for employees, welfare schemes for the weaker section, Panchayati Raj, Equal Remuneration Act, Consumer Protection Act of 1986, 86th Constitutional Amendment Act of 2002, Environment Protection Act, MGNREGS, Cow Slaughter Prohibition Act, Janani Suraksha Yojana, maternity benefit, okay, separation of judiciary and executive in public life, old age pension schemes, etc. So tomorrow we will meet, and I'll post the course in the link below so you can watch it. So thank you for watching this. Have an awesome day.